Towards the end of the Second World War, the first evidence began to emerge of the massive crimes of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. People from all over Europe had been deported, starved, used as slave labor, tortured to death, and killed in gas chambers. They were Jews, Poles, Serbs, Gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, Democrats, any opponent of the Nazi regime. It was the Allied forces who first entered the concentration camps. Without warning, they confronted scenes of horror beyond the imagination. What follows are the testimonies of soldiers who became eyewitnesses to the truth of the Holocaust. The first camp to be overrun was here on the outskirts of the Polish city of Lublin. It was called Majdanek. Units of the Red Army entered on July 23, 1944. Alongside them were members of the 1st Polish Division.
On the way to Lublin, we came across a camp. At that time, we had no idea it was a camp. To me, it looked just like, like barracks, military barracks or something like that. And we came across that camp, and eventually we entered this camp, not knowing what was going on there. We simply walked through the camp in Majdanek. Well, we were wondering where the people were, but unfortunately, there was nobody to tell us where the people were. We had no idea that it was a concentration camp because we were not warned about it. Then we came across the crematoriums, the ovens, and there were 6 or 7 of them. And what struck me is in that ashes, it was not a smooth ash the way you burn wood or something like that. There was something bony in there. And that struck me the most. And then it was pointed out to us by one of the officers that that was a concentration camp. Now, we had no idea what concentration camp meant, and that people actually were destroyed there. Lublin was not exactly a tiny city, and it was right located there. I was very surprised about it. A little farther again, we saw a mountain of ash, but then we didn't realize that that was a human ash. We assumed that that was some kind of an industrial waste. I was stunned, I was shocked, and it was just a complete disbelief that human being had absolutely no value to the people which committed those crimes. There was disregard of everything, and I just couldn't believe what I saw. I just simply couldn't believe. And yet, I just simply said the prayer for the dead and went on. And that was the end of Majdanek for me that particular day, just simply crying in silence.
As the Soviet army advanced further into Poland, more killing sites were found, which indicated that over 2 million Jews alone had already been murdered, despite the efforts of the SS to destroy the evidence of their crimes of genocide. On the 27th of January 1945, 4 Soviet divisions were diverted to liberate the greatest killing center of them all, Auschwitz. Only a few thousand sick prisoners were left. Tens of thousands more had been sent westwards on death marches.
I saw 4 crematoria that had been blown up, and one the Germans hadn't had time to blow up. I saw the gas chambers where prisoners had been poisoned with cyclone gas. There were 29 warehouses left full of prisoners' belongings. I went into several. It was horrifying. Suitcases piled high and filled with men's, women's, and children's clothes. All in rows according to size. The Germans are very methodical, so everything had been sorted by age and size, etc.
Возрасту и так дальше. Но больше всего меня поразило, что лежат в чемоданах
But what shocked me most was seeing the spectacle frames and the masses of false teeth.
Зубных протезов, вот, различного рода
All kinds of shaving tackle,
вплоть до
even shaving brushes.
смазать лицо. Ну,
It
невозможно
was
было
impossible to
поверить.
believe.
Я сначала даже
And
не
at
поверил.
first, I didn't believe it. In front of me were boxes filled to the brim with 7 tons of women's hair taken by executioners from their victims. It's unimaginable how many women had to be destroyed to produce 7 tons of hair. I was there first. You can imagine how traumatic it was. I'm a soldier. I've seen thousands of dead Germans. My own people too. But that was war on the battlefield. People who were armed. I've seen how partisans were hanged. I've seen people killed in bombing raids. But using industrial methods to destroy innocent people, one cannot get over it. One cannot forget.
Этого пережить невозможно. Этого забыть нельзя.
With the advance of the Red Army in the east, a vast network of over 2,000 slave labor camps, transit camps, and killing centers had collapsed. Thousands of prisoners were force-marched by the SS into camps in Western Germany. The horror and misery increased as the camp system was stretched to breaking point. By the spring of 1945, the British and American armies had penetrated deep into Nazi Germany. On the 4th of April, the American 4th Armored Division discovered a camp called Ohrdruf.
I was a PFC with the 89th Infantry.
What does a PFC mean?
Private First Class.
What is it that so upsets you about talking about this? Michael, what is it that so upsets you about this? Is it the images you saw? Why did it so upset you after 50 years?
This so long ago. Excuse me. I've got to get started into this. I was with the 314th Engineer Combat Battalion. I don't remember just the exact date, but we were coming up the road in trucks. And it was kind of a misty morning, like everything just seemed to stand still. And then we came upon this big complex, like it was setting down from us. We were along a dirt road. So we pulled up, it was our company. Our lieutenant was in the Jeep, and he pulled over to the side, these gates. One was like part open. And he told our driver, this Kawiri, his name was, he told him to go on in. And we drove in, and one truck behind the other. And I recall, like, I was in the back of the truck, which is actually the front of the truck when you have, troops sitting in there. So naturally, I jumped up. I was the first one up, and this wire going across these barracks, I got hit. The wire hit my helmet. I lost my helmet, my skull cap, Now, one of my buddies gave me the helmet back, and then we jumped off the truck. And our sergeant, he says to check these barracks out. So naturally, we jumped off and we started going outside to see if these barracks were set up like in a perimeter. And then as you're walking, you look between these barracks and, you stop. And I said, like, what's that? And naturally, we were still like at the ready. And we worked our way to this circular in this compound, this circle there, and there was dead people. There are flies that look like pools of blood, and until we got up closer, and all these people seemed to have been shot in the head. I don't know, 60, 70, maybe 80, I don't know. You don't count. And it was a mess. And then as we kept going, we hit these lime pits. They were like holes with people's bodies thrown in them, and they had like this white lime thrown on them. Then we saw against this other building, there was like cords of wood that people were stacked. It made you mad. These people didn't have a chance. I mean, they were sick to start with. You could see there wasn't. All you seen was bones and skulls and eyes ready to pop out, and they were shot in the head, behind the head, in the front, in the temple. It kind of galls you. You'd like. I've seen a lot of guys cry. Like I say, when you're younger, you could take this. You're in a war, but once in a while I'd have a dream about it. My wife, she just told me I had nightmares. She said I used to curse in my dreams. And I would never tell her just what it was. Anyway, when we started to get things organized, naturally, the CO was there, and all of a sudden this place was loaded with GIs. We were there several hours, then we went down into the town, grabbed the burgomaster, and naturally everybody knew nothing. Yeah, it's a joke. And we went back into the camp. We were there several hours, and then we pulled out. We were gone a couple of days. We hit some other towns, Jena, Eisenach. I think it was just around Eisenach. They called us back, and we went back into the camp, and we took over the burial details. And our job was we took over the towers. Then we had the generals come in. We had Ike, we had General Patton. He was our army leader. Our General Finley and Bradley were there. In fact, General Patton was reciting the alphabet his way, and I remember Ike telling him to simmer down, George, simmer down. I know, because I was standing right next to him when they were interviewing this gentleman that was a prisoner, and he was explaining the gallows to them, how they used to hang him over there. It's really, I think people shouldn't forget. You got to make sure these things never happen again. You got to stop things before they even get started. the poor people. You know, you take a GI, you're fighting in a war. You know, you don't want to see anybody hurt or killed, especially your own kind. But you're in a war for a reason. That was one of the reasons. They were barbaric. But these other people, regardless of what they were, what nationality they were, it's just, they didn't stand a chance. They couldn't even fight back. I think if you put 10 to 15 of those bodies together, what I saw, if you got 150 pounds out of them, you got a lot, because they were just bones and all. I seen when they were trying to pick them up to bury them, that they just fall apart. Sorry I broke down like that.
I think it was important you told your story.
Maybe I needed that. If anybody that don't believe this thing happened, then I wish they were with us for a few seconds just to see. Yeah, I feel better now.
On the 11th of April 1945, a combat team from the 9th American Armored Infantry Battalion was told of a large camp by Russian prisoners of war who had escaped. A patrol was sent, and entering through a hole in the fence, discovered that the SS had fled, leaving the prisoners of the Buchenwald concentration camp to fend for themselves. The patrol reported the location of the camp and then left. Later that day, the first units of the 6th American Armored Division arrived.
We were looking for a hole in the fence that the Russians had told us that they blew to get out. And incidentally, they call us the liberators of the camp. The people in Buchenwald actually liberated themselves. The gates were locked. We blew them open. And here we had the biggest shock of our lives, because the sight that greeted us was row after row after row of dead bodies just piled up like cordwood. And it was devastating. Some of us got sick, threw up. Looking and seeing Jewish stars on some of the striped cotton uniforms, the horror really hit me, that what the Russians had said about the Jews being decimated in the camp was true. My stomach went into knots, and I threw up on the spot. But you can never forget the pile after pile after pile of dead bodies. And there's one scene that I still see. If I'm overtired or I get sick or if I can't sleep, I see the face of a pretty little girl laying on top of the pile, half naked. And the only thing that this kid ever did to deserve this was being born Jewish. And the reality of the Holocaust hit me right there. And to this day, it's hard to shake. Well, we moved on we saw some buildings, moved over to them, and they were barrack-type buildings. We went in, kicked the door down on one, and here we got sick all over again, because till this point we hadn't seen anybody outside. No soldiers, no people. But when we got into this barracks and we saw, you can't put into words what we actually saw. There were human skeletons stacked up in bunks, jammed into bunks, under the worst conditions that you can think of. No toilet facilities, no running water, no nothing, couple of buckets around on the floor. The smell in the place was overwhelming. Actually, it wasn't a dirty smell. It was a smell of starvation. And starvation does have a unique, a sickly, sweet, overpowering odor. It grabs your nose, it grabs your throat, and it knots your stomach. And when we first went into the crematorium, when we opened the ovens, we found half-cremated bodies in there. And here again, the outrage came. But there was a shaft and carts that looked like a butcher's cart with hooks on wagons and the dead bodies on there, and they pushed them up the ramp from underneath up to the crematoria ovens and threw the bodies in there. We were getting ready to leave, and the one fellow pointed to a door and he said, "Open that door." Well, my driver, Jimmy, walked over, opened the door, and Jimmy and I got so sick that it's almost impossible to describe, because the sight that greeted us on the table was a lamp with a tattoo on it, and the skin size, well, we realized that it was human skin, but the skin size must have been from somebody's throat down to their groin, and it was a tattoo of the winged victory. And the shock and the horror. Now, on the table underneath of this, there was 4 or 5 small globular lamps, and they were made of human skin too. And these were the work of a woman by the name of Ilsa Koch. And her husband had been the commander of this camp, and she had fled just before they heard that the American troops were so close. Well, the horror of that, being a kid, 19 years old, even though I'd been in heavy combat, what I saw there was just devastating. Well, I realized that I had to get a message out. And the message that I got out and was picked up and heard through the Corps and through parts of my own unit and division was, what man's done here, only God can rectify.
I was attached to the 5th Corps and the 1st Army, which liberated Buchenwald. One wave of the 1st Army went in, and the 2nd wave I was with, and I went into the camp. There was what to me was one of the saddest places of Buchenwald, because here was what I call the barracks of the living dead. These were people who were so ill and so sick that they couldn't even raise up from their bunks. It was obvious that most of them were going to die, but it was terribly important for them to know that liberation had come and that at least they were going to die as free people. I remember one old man who reached out and took a hold of my trench coat and said, "American, American, gut." And then this American did about the worst thing I could have possibly done out of ignorance. These people were starving. Obviously, they needed food. I gave them pay rations, which was the only thing I had with me, which meant really condensed, very rich chocolate, rich cheese, and crackers. If I had known better, I would have known that people in this state could not survive eating that kind of rich food. When the medics came later, they tried to comfort me. They said, "Oh, well, you didn't know, you're not a nurse," and they would have died anyway. But to this day, it haunts me that I may have hurried the death of some of those people by mistaken kindness on my part. I left Buchenwald physically, but emotionally and in my head, I've never really left Buchenwald.
On April 29th, a company from the 45th Division of the American 7th Army approached Dachau, as did a company from the 42nd Division. Both companies were to become liberators. Members of the 45th remembered it this way.
I received a sudden radio message ordering me to proceed immediately to take the concentration camp at Dachau, to seize it, seal it off, and let no one in or out. Those were my specific orders. Well, I had not the faintest idea what was at Dachau. Up to that point in the war, neither me or, as far as I know, any American soldiers had any knowledge about German concentration camps. They meant nothing to us.
Well, Sparks had come up to me and he says, Walsh, he said, got a change in orders. And he said, we're supposed to take this concentration camp, which is, he pointed in the general direction. You couldn't see it from these little houses at the edge of, in the town of Dachau. But he said, follow this railroad line. There was a railroad line there that ran into the camp. And he said, follow this railroad line, it'll take you into the camp. He says, don't let anybody in or out.
We saw a number of bodies that had fallen out of the cars. We then examined the cars, and we found that each of them was full of dead bodies. All 39 cars, we checked them all. We found no signs of life. The dead people were, all appeared to be civilians and very emaciated. Hardly any of them weighed, I would say, 95 or 100 pounds. And it appeared to us that they had been starved to death and been without water, and apparently had been on that railway train for maybe several days or several weeks.
The thing that bothered me was these people, their relatives, didn't know where they were, didn't know what happened to them, and they were here. And I kind of felt bad because of knowing that their relatives didn't know where they were buried or where they were died or what had happened to them.
Now, up to that point, no one had fired at us. So we weren't sure whether the camp was deserted or if we were going to receive any fire. But we did go into the camp in battle formation, and I followed one of the right platoons of I Company. And there were over 100 buildings of various types in this camp, and the camp itself actually covered several hundred acres. So there were barracks and homes and gardens and streets. The whole thing was beautifully landscaped.
Once we started inside that gate, my guys were all extremely wrought and extremely upset about this whole situation. They were all veterans. Some of them had seen more combat than I had, a lot of them. And I broke down in the middle of this. After we got inside the gate, I kind of broke down. And all of a sudden, Sparks shows up. He says, Bill, what the hell's going on? I said, I can't take it. This has got to me. And he says, well, you better put it together. And he says, get your men together and start going through this camp where we can't break down and we can't do this, and get yourself together. I said, okay. And I pretty much got together, but I was still shaken. And the other fellows were too.
And then I heard some firing ahead of me, and I knew my men were running into something. And the firing kept up sporadically. No heavy fire. And then my men started rounding up German soldiers, prisoners. We rounded up perhaps 200 to 250 altogether.
There were probably 20 or 30 SS guys that we separated from the others, and they were put against a wall, and they were. And I told my men if they even looked like they were going to run away, to shoot them.
Walsh was extremely distraught, and he was cursing. And he just wasn't with it. I mean, he was so upset that he was not in control of himself. So at that time, I informed him that I was relieving him of command till he came to his senses. It was a good 20, 25, 30 minutes later before I saw him again and put him back in command of the company.
These SS guys had been lining up people in this camp and shooting them on and off almost every day for the last 6 or 7 years. This was old hat to them to line up prisoners and shoot them. And when we were lining them up, they probably figured, Jesus, I mean, now we're going to get it. And they got a little jumpy, and I think that's what caused our fellows, who were very loose on the trigger at this situation, because this of the state they were in.
And some of the I Company men simply went berserk. As we collected some prisoners, one man cut loose on them with a machine gun. He killed about 12. And I was standing only about 50 feet away when he opened fire. And I immediately rushed over and I kicked him with my combat boot. I got forward on his machine gun, and he was a small man. I grabbed him by the collar and pulled him up, and I said, "What the hell are you doing?" He said, "Colonel, they were trying to get away." Well, they were doing some milling around, but I don't think anybody was trying to get away. And just why he fired, I have no explanation for. He was crying. He was crying and sobbing when I pulled him away from the gun. He was a young lad, probably 19 years of age. Hadn't been with us very long. He was a replacement, had been with us about 3 months. I was livid with anger because I did not tolerate that. There was no point in killing those people. As much as I disliked the SS and the people connected with them, I would have never allowed anyone to kill them out of hand. And there were some other isolated instances where soldiers killed German guards. As it turned out, the total count was about 34 guards who were killed in the operation, and over 200 taken prisoner. And it took me a good 30 minutes to get the men under control. You see, many of them were screaming. Some were crying. And it was a very difficult moment for everyone. As I say, it was very difficult for me because I was trying to restore order, and I was giving some rather harsh commands myself, telling them to calm down. But we finally got the thing calmed down, and no more shooting, and that's when the prisoners came out from their barracks and started screaming. And the first thing that I saw was bodies being tossed. These 30-some-odd thousand people were packed up close to right in front of me, and they started throwing bodies over their hands, passing them down this row of hands and tearing at them. I immediately asked my interpreter, what's going on in there? And he said, "Colonel, they're killing the informers." Well, there was nothing we could do to stop them. They tore them apart by hand. I don't know how many, but probably 15 or 20. I later found out that, in talking to the prisoners, that the people they killed were in charge of each barracks, and they were called capos, and they were Germans. For most part, they were German criminals, because the Germans did put a lot of criminals in there. So in charge of each barracks was this capo who was a German criminal. And he had life or death authority over the prisoners under his command. And if he turned them in for any infraction, they were tortured or executed. So they hated those people, and they killed every one of them. Within minutes after our arrival, again by hand. I don't know how they did it, but they literally tore them apart. And we were helpless to stop it. But I was extremely tired. I was distraught. It had been a long war up to that point. I was getting maybe 4 hours sleep every 24. I was bone tired. I had been in combat for 2 years. And Dachau, from an emotional viewpoint, was the worst experience that I had had in the whole war.
I grew up with a good foundation in what Hitler was all about. I knew what he wanted. I knew, you know, that Germans were the best people in the world, that minorities, particularly Jews, were bad people. And I didn't just learn that from my parents. I learned that from the people that we congregated with. When the war came around, I was still in high school in 1941. I graduated in 42 and went into the Army in 1943. And of course, the Army, knowing that I spoke the language and that I was born in Germany, really wanted to send me into the Pacific arena rather than into the European arena. And I made quite a case with the Army that I really would be better off being sent to Europe, because I did have a knowledge of the culture and I did have a knowledge of the language, and that I could probably be more helpful. They informed me that if I was caught as a German citizen, even in an American uniform, it wouldn't be too nice a world for me. But in any event, I went to England, and then I eventually ended up with the 11th Armored Division, who were the first division into the concentration camp of Mauthausen in Austria, which is about 10 miles outside of Linz.
The war had almost ended by the time Mauthausen was liberated on May the 5th, 1945, by the American 11th Armored Division. It was one of the last great concentration camps to be entered by the Allies. For any prisoner to be sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp was virtually a death sentence. This complex, with its 60 subcamps, was amongst the most feared in the entire concentration camp system. Here the Nazis had taken the concept of murderous forced labor to its fullest 20th century expression.
When I first had contact with Mauthausen, it was the morning that the camp had been entered by earlier remnants of our group. But I guess the real impact of that thing came when I saw the first striped suit. And all of a sudden I began to see these people that looked more like ghosts. I mean, their eyes were glassy, they were just skin and bones. And it just kind of, it was just kind of weird, you know? I don't even know how to explain it, but all of a sudden you're seeing some things that are different. People aren't wearing uniforms, and they're not carrying guns, and they're not dying, but they're just human beings in striped shirts that look like ghosts. And the horrible thing is that when I stopped a couple of them and started talking in German to them, they went bonkers. I mean, I was just another German suddenly. It was the language, and it was just weird. And I just started to walk around and seeing these buildings, and I do still remember that I was in total shock. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't want to believe this. And I remember going down these steps and walking into this big room, which was kind of like a huge empty hall. And there were meat hooks that were hanging off the wall. And there was blood on the walls. I just got very angry. I really got very angry. Coming into a room that looked like a shower, and I'm reading in German, shower room, and all of a sudden I'm seeing that this is not a shower room at all, but it's a gas chamber. I guess I really went into the realities of it all when I walked into the next room, which is where the furnaces were. And I saw these bodies stacked like cordwood, ready to be put into the furnaces. And I just seem to remember that. I just ran out of there as quickly as I could, and I got upstairs into the courtyard, into the light and the fresh air. Fresh air, there wasn't any fresh air, into the... And just, I felt such a terrible anger. I wanted to go out and kill every German I could find. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. And then I decided I would just walk around the camp and see what else was to see, and that's when I went into the quarry, where there were rocks and huge rocks. I found out about the quarry that this was the way that they diabolically executed people. They made them carry these huge chunks of rock up these steps, and then when they got to the top, they disposed of them. They went back down and were given bigger chunks to carry up, and they literally made them carry those rocks until every single one of them was dead. That's what they did. The thing that is most vivid in my memory, and something I think I'll never forget, is the number of steps that there were into that quarry, 186. Now that's a lot of steps if you think about it. I spent probably an hour in the camp walking around down to the quarry, trying to talk to people. And then I left. I had to get out of there. And I remember coming out, and there were some farmers in the field. I stopped the Jeep. I walked out there, and I said, "What goes on in that camp?" And they said, "We don't know." And I just wanted to shoot those people right then and there. I just wanted to shoot them. That you can be 100 yards from that camp, smelling what I'm smelling, and tell me they don't know what's going on. I don't think I'll ever forget the smell and all of a sudden the realization that the country in which I was born could do things like that. And then, right on top of it, right after, deny it right in front of the gates that it existed. I had one brother who was here in the United States in the American Navy, in the Pacific, who really denies the existence of the Holocaust and says it didn't happen, even though I've told him repeatedly that I was a witness. I had two half-brothers who were in the German army. One was in the infantry, and the other one was a medic who was killed at Leningrad. The one that went through the war and came out alive now lives in the vicinity of Cologne. And I vowed after the experiences that I would never, ever visit my relatives. I had a grandmother there. She was still alive after the war. My mother had a sister and innumerable uncles, aunts, and nephews. And I vowed I would never go see them. I did not go and see my grandmother. I did not go to see my mother's sister, as long as I was there as a soldier. When I came home, I vowed I would never go back to Germany. I did not go back until 1972. And the reason I went back is that I felt that there was a new generation coming into being, the kids, and that they were the ones that had to be educated as to what happened, and that was my duty to go back there and help do that. And I did, and I found some wonderful things. I found that those kids and their kids, my grandkids or my grandnephews and nieces, have been taught about the Holocaust and have a clear example and understanding of what happened, and they're better for it.
What about your brother?
My brother is a denier. My brother is a denier, the one in Germany and the one here. They have their excuses, and they couldn't do anything about it. If you did, you would end up in the camp yourself. And my question always is that if I knew that within 100 miles of me, or even 10 miles of me, there were a camp where they were burning people and doing what they did in these camps, that I hoped that I had had the courage to be in that camp myself and maybe end up in the furnace.